So Hatch Showprint has a neon sign that they bought back in the 1940s with Acuff for governor money. Roy Acuff, known as the king of country music, ran for office back in 1948. It was his second time running, actually. This go was the real deal, as his run 4 years earlier in 1944 was as a protest candidate. He was doing it to F with the system. Why? Well, first, I should tell you that Nashville Demystified is the show you are listening to, and I am your host, Alex Steed. Nashville Demystified is a podcast, as I'm sure you're aware, in which I get to know the city better by talking with the folks who live, work, agitate, and make art here. Nashville Demystified is made possible by Knack Factory, a video content production house with offices here in the city. If you need commercial video produced for your company or for your message or idea, etc., let Knack Factory know. It's what they do. Nashville Demystified is distributed by We Own This Town, a collection of podcasts made by Nashvillians. All the shows are good. Go and listen to all the shows right now. I promise they're good, but definitely check out Bandsplainer, in which music journalist Olivia Ladd teams up with a new guest host every episode to give you background on all those bands that you should probably know about but don't, and now you're embarrassed that you don't know anything about them because you're a little bit old like me. Give the show a listen. Olivia's great. She was one of our earliest guests, and she's a fantastic person, great writer, wonderful host. Oh, I should say, before we get back to Acuff, that we're going to be talking about Acuff's run for governor. And then we're talking with Mercy Bell, who is a fabulous entertainer and singer and musician, all around, pop folk phenomenon. She's wonderful through and through. We had a great conversation, and you're going to hear that in the second part of the show. Okay, back to Acuff. Why did he run a protest campaign in 1944? Well, I feel so. Talk about beating around the bush. We're going to get there. But I feel that this is especially relevant considering the term identity politics tends to get tossed around disparagingly when it's about people who are legitimately on the crap end of our political system, but not in every other scenario. That ignores that all politics and political narratives trace back to identity somehow. And by saying, quote, identity politics, folks are usually diminishing the identities of those they associate with this term. Like how we think it's sort of, par for the course when Hank Jr. is a belligerent loudmouth or when Kid Rock does his best Hank Jr. impression. That's country, right? But it still feels like an outlier when, say, Sturgill Simpson stands for a cause that we feel is traditionally left-wing, or when a queer Filipino-American artist and musician like Mercy Bell gets recognized on country charts, as she was this week. We're like, oh, where does that fit in country? Because we think that there's a bit of a normal country narrative, quote-unquote normal country narrative, that us country lovers who don't fit into the perspectives of that narrative, get a little uneasy about. So where do those perspectives come from, and where did that narrative come from? Well, it all goes back, not all of it, but a lot of it goes back, it turns out, to Acuff, again, the so-called king of country music. For those of you who don't know, Roy Acuff was just a phenomenal musician, singer, ran a publishing house, one of the earliest and most successful publishing houses in country music, was a mainstay at the OPRY forever, just forever and ever. And is known, the king of country music for good reason. And so a year before the protest run in 44, back in 1943, Acuff invited then Governor Prentice Cooper to the OPRY to come be a guest. Or it was not exactly to the OPRY, it was to an event OPRY related. And Cooper, a Democrat back when Tennessee was a solidly blue state, dismissed the invitation in word, eventually got back to Acuff, that the dismissal came with some disparaging remarks about Acuff and country music overall. According to Cooper, Acuff's work with the OPRY was responsible for making Nashville the hillbilly capital of the U.S., and that wasn't a great thing as far as Cooper was concerned. This played into the larger narrative that would take hold, particularly in the second part of the 20th century, that the left were, more or less effete intellectuals who were out of touch with how, quote, real people live, and conservatives are, despite a number of policies that work against the best interests of working people. They're real folks. And so with this throwaway comment from some asshole in charge, Acuff got a little steamed and decided he was going to show him, and ran in the 1944 primaries to protest Cooper's bullshit. 4 years later, though, he made a more serious run. There was no chance in hell he was going to win back in the 1940s. Tennessee was a strongly blue state, but he did very well in the Republican primary, getting 81% of the vote. He drew people. He was a celebrity. His platform, according to the New York Times, was centered on the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule. And he said that if that didn't work in the Capitol, he didn't want to be governor. Despite being warmly received by many Tennesseans, with whom his salt of the earth charm did resonate, he only received 33% of the vote. But in people who've worked in politics, this will stand out to you, and this will make a lot of sense. The Republican Party, from stuff that I've read, didn't necessarily care that he won the governorship. What was appealing was that a celebrity like Acuff could go around throughout the state and draw people on smaller ticket races. He had a down ticket effect, as it's called. So the idea that this celebrity would go throughout the state repping this run for governor was appealing, because it meant that maybe it would bring people out to vote in their local elections. The Republican Party at the time wasn't as good as, actually, like both parties are now, when it came to mobilizing people to vote. Acuff was someone who could do that. Of his loss back in 1984, he said, "I'm proud I wasn't elected because my life in the entertainment world has been prolonged, and my life would have been much shorter if I had been governor." He also said, and I find this hilarious, "The greatest thing the Democrats have ever done for me was to defeat me for governor of Tennessee," which I like. It shows a fantastic sense of humor. In its remembrance of Acuff on his 1992 passing, the Chicago Tribune wrote, "Governor Cooper has long since been proven incorrect. What Acuff was doing was making Tennessee the hillbilly capital not of the United States, but of the world. So take that, Governor Cooper." So Roy Acuff was the king of country music in format, sure, but also by way of solidifying its dominant conservative narrative that Merle Haggard would both honor and poke fun at Inoki from Skokie. Listen to Tyler, Me, and Co's episode of Cocaine and Rhinestones for the background on that one. And if you have not listened to that podcast, listen to it. It's the gold standard on Nashville podcast for sure, but on country music storytelling, as far as I'm concerned. Just stop listening to this. Go listen to his podcast. And it's also the narrative that in my view, would bring a feminist icon like Dolly Parton to distance herself from the word feminism. That is rooted in this new Dolly podcast that the folks from Radiolab have put out. Also worth going to listen to. But don't stop listening because of that podcast. Listen to that one after. I just want to make sure I'm not discouraging you from continuing to listen more than I have to. It would set the tone that would bring Nixon on to the Opry, a guest of Acuff later on, and that would, bring country music to help facilitate and create the illusion that conservatism somehow is synonymous with the working class and with salt of the earth people. After all, by the time he ran for office, Acuff, formerly a literal snake oil salesman, he was traveling around with a medicine show. He was a performer, yes, but he was also the head of the most substantial music publishing operation in country music. Aesthetically, he was a man of the people, absolutely. But by the time he turned his response to Governor Cooper's snub into an actual bid for the governorship, particularly the second time around, he was no longer a, quote, man of the people. He was in publishing, and he was in the public eye for nearly a decade to that point in the context of the Opry. he was a celebrity. And while his publishing operation didn't make it big until 1950, I mean, he was still not necessarily representative of how typical Tennesseans live. And that helped this folksy man who was going around the state and running for governor as sort of a representative of the people's values didn't necessarily match up with the realities of how people in Tennessee were at the time. But I mean, you know, what politician, for the most part, I mean, there are obviously some exceptions, but what politician's life does. By the way, while I was looking all of this up, and this is just a super quick aside, but while I was researching all of this, I wanted to find the original Hat Show print poster because there are a couple of versions of it. I mean, I don't know. There's a smiling version and there's like a sullen-faced version. And I don't know if the smiling version is an edit that came out later after the campaign or if it was a re-edit. I'm not entirely sure, and I should probably find out. But I wanted to see that poster that paid for the Hat Show print neon sign. And so I was looking it up and I came across an entry for it in an online auction service with probably the greatest online auction description of all time. It's going to be hard to do this justice. I'll put this on the website so you can see it. But it's going to be hard to do justice because it's largely in caps and sort of arbitrarily alternates between a regular case and, again, all caps, but here goes. I'll do my best. Roy Acuff for governor poster. This is not a reproduction. It is not a reprint. Roy's original signature as he wrote the year he was running at the bottom of the poster. See picture. Getting ready to go to that grand ole Opry in the sky, and I'm selling my possessions from the music industry I've treasured for years. This poster is 17 by 22. Please email me any questions you may have. I offer 100% satisfaction guaranteed and 100% truthful. Good luck. So, okay, a couple of things. First, this is a tremendously heavy reveal to know in your description of an item you're auctioning online. Second, I am one hundo, calling dying, getting ready to go to that grand ole Opry in the sky from here on out for the rest of my life. That's what I'm calling dying. It's settled. You were here for it. And really, sir, you're wishing me luck? That is very gracious, all things considered. Good luck to you on the other side. I hope that you sold the poster. By the way, how will this person guarantee satisfaction? God, I don't know. I love this description. Love it. Yeah, just the whole vibe. Hey, I'm dying. By the way, here are the poster dimensions is so something my father would say. So I appreciate that as well. All right. That's it for the Acuff story. I mean, I love the idea that he had his feelings hurt. He ran as a protest candidate. And then 4 years later, he ran as an actual candidate. And then was stoked that he lost because he could be a country star for decades and decades and decades. And then help facilitate and continue to facilitate this this narrative that country music is essentially a staid and conservative art form, like literally and figuratively conservative art form. Not necessarily my series of perspectives, but still very good. All right. Well, I talked with Mercy Bell. Mercy is just a really fabulous and fantastic person. She put out a record in October, self-titled. It is, it's great. I mean, we talk so much about the trappings of genre, which is something I really enjoy talking with artists about. And we talk a lot about, all sorts of different trappings. in this interview. We talk about her influences and what moves her, how she got to Nashville, why being in Nashville is interesting and important to her. You know, where queerness fits into this whole perspective, because, you know, she's an openly queer artist, and how that fits into genre classification, selling music, and on and on. And it turns out we have a similar set of inspirations and interests musically from the same time period. Maybe mine's a little later because I anticipate, or I imagine I'm a little bit older, but it sounds like we were listening to the same things at the same time. So we talk about that. And we also talk at the very end about mental health. And after the fact, you know, after the interview, you can't hear this because we had this conversation offline or outside of the recording. You know, Mercy said, well, sorry, I went down that mental health rabbit hole. And I'm honestly so glad that we did. I want to do that with everyone I talk with here, especially in music, because this is and you know this, especially if you're a musician, but this is a hard career and hard industry to maintain any semblance of order around mental health. There's so many factors playing against creating some degree of mental stability. And we talk a bit about that. We talk about why it's important to check in on that, and why it's important to be, you know, your true self, not because it's like this aspirational great thing to do, but because it's important for your health, even when there are many, many factors often seemingly counting against it. I'm glad we went there. So get ready for Mercy. Before we do that, this is so late in the podcast to encourage you to follow us on social media and subscribe and do all those things. But it's important. It's important for us to have listeners, because then maybe people will support us and we can continue doing this thing. All right, here we go. Mercy Bell.
Once I was young in New York City. The summer was hard, but damn, it was pretty. And I wore a black dress to make myself right, to cover the mess of myself. Oh, and I wore a black dress to make myself right, to cover the mess of myself. Baby, you should know pictures don't do you justice. For look in your eye numbers you with a haunted, and I know you can't stay. Something will come.
You just came out with an album in October.
Yes,
and
October 18th. Yep.
And that's not your first. You had an album before that.
Yeah, I had one that I made right out of college when I lived in New York, and that was like 2011. Right out of college is the wrong term, because it's maybe 3 or 4 years after I graduated. But it was the first collection of songs. So I made that one in New York, and that one was like almost 10 years ago. So
wow.
Yeah, so this is like 10 years worth of songs.
Yeah.
But it's only 10 songs, but it's the ones that I like the most. So
Right, totally. And so why did you end up in Nashville if you were in New York?
I was, at the time, I was dating a girl who's from Arkansas, and she was up there in Brooklyn, and then she was like, can we move back to the South? And I've moved around so much in my life that I was like, yeah, sure. Like I felt like as a person, I had never fully unpacked from any place that I'd ever lived. So I was like, why not move somewhere else, you know? And so we kind of went to Arkansas for a little bit, which I like Arkansas. I was like, I need like job opportunities. Mm. So, and then I was like, I was doing music. So I said, why not Nashville? And we came here and we really liked it. So, and I had enough friends in New York being like, Nashville is the real deal if you want to talk about music. I remember my friend Christine Hoberg, who is an amazing musician who's up in Minnesota. She said, you know, and if you ever visit Nashville, they take it seriously there. Not that they don't take it seriously in New York, but they take it extra seriously here. So
what do they take seriously?
Music.
Oh yeah, for sure. And how does that manifest? Like, what is because I know exactly what you're talking about, but like, what is different in the way that like music occupies here?
I think the biggest thing is that people, there are more musicians here, but the level of quality of music is just, it's so good here that you have to be you have to work on yourself to be extra good, you know? And it was a little bit intimidating when I first moved here. Because in New York, there's art of every kind. So there's like, you can be an artist in New York, but it's like, when I'm back there, I say back home, but when I'm back in New York, I'm always like hanging out with my theater friends who do theater, and the ones who work in film and TV, and the ones who work in like digital media and photography. It's like a smorgasbord basically of like artistic mediums. Here, it's like everybody here is a musician. A lot of them are great musicians, so you have to, if you want to like get anywhere, you really have to work on your like craft all the time.
Right. And
it made me stop for a long time because I was overwhelmed and intimidated by it, and I kind of just got into like surviving basically. And it was a couple years ago, like 3 years ago, it was after my mom died that I was like, I'm going to do this again. Like I have nothing really. So I needed something. And so I kind of dusted stuff off and went back at it.
Yeah. There's not, I lost my father about 10 years ago.
I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry as well.
Yeah.
Because that is like, there's nothing for recalibration. Like,
nope.
Yeah.
It's like, I was like, what am I doing? You get hit by death and you're like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? You know, It was almost, for me, the music thing was, I remember I played a show, like, I want to say it was like less than a month after my mom died, and it was like all my friends showed up, and it was very cathartic for me. And I remember some of my like bandmates at the time were like, why don't you, and still some bandmates, but the band has kind of fluctuated here and there, were like, let's do this album, because like they could tell I needed something, you know?
Right.
So it was kind of been a 3-year process of making it. So it was really kind of, for me, kind of grief therapy more than anything.
Yeah. Was your mother familiar with what you were performing and what music you were making?
Yeah, she was like a huge reason to, like, I remember when I first started doing music, like when I graduated college, I got offered this job in Boston, like off the bat, like, and all of the logical person in me was like, I guess I'll go to Boston, which is 45 miles from my house, and like have this job. And then part of me was like, I want to move to New York and do music. And my mom was like, go to New York and do music, which is like very, like, she always supported my music all the time. Like she was the person who, and my parents are like this, but they always promote art over everything, even if it's not logical. Like they're always like, you should do some art, because they're very, I grew up in a very artistic house. So there was always art of some form going on. And so it kind of threw me when I went out into like the real world and noticed that like a lot of people don't do that, you know?
No, that's not the default.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, okay, got it. So yeah, it would definitely have been what she wanted. I mean, she didn't even tell me that she was dying at the end, because she didn't want me to like give up. She didn't want me to like move back and not do music.
Yeah.
So like that's the level of what like how much she believed in art, you know? So, and creativity and following your dreams and stuff like that. So
yeah. What was your mom's name?
Kathleen.
Oh, Kathleen.
Yeah, Kathleen.
Kathleen sounds like a rad lady.
She was a pretty rad lady.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so making this record was, you say, grief therapy, and it was a culmination of a lot of sort of like work and introspection, because you said it's like 10 of your favorite songs from 10 years.
Yep.
Now you're getting a recognition and acknowledgement. Can we talk about genre?
Yeah, yes, please. I just had lunch with one of my former bandmates today, and my friend, and we were talking about genre today.
Yeah,
over Vietnamese food. Yeah.
Totally. And the culmination of cultures that were happening while you were talking about your genre, eating Vietnamese food in Nashville. Where do you land, and is it important that you land anywhere?
I have a hard time with this, not in like a ego way, but in like a ADHD way. I learned songwriting literally from, I'm going to say Patty Griffin. Are you familiar with her music? Yeah. Patty Griffin. I love Sufjan Stevens also. And then Max Martin, the top 40 pop songwriter. Right on. I just am a big fan of folk lyrics, or as I want to say it's Woody Guthrie, but I might be wrong. 3 Chords and the Truth. Sure. And I am a very I studied short stories and poetry and stuff where you can only get a little bit done. You only have a little space to get a lot done. So you can't just babble, as I may be babbling now. But so that kind of falls into a folk category, stripped down folk songwriting, like Joni Mitchell, who else is super good at Jenny Lewis does it really well. Johnny Cash did it really well. A lot of the great folk greats. But folk kind of is if you say that to people right now, they kind of, their eyes glaze over and they're like, what does it mean? Are you dancing around a maypole? What does it mean? For me, from where I come from, it's brutal songwriting. Mm-hmm. It's Joni Mitchell was huge for me also. It just listen to her lyrics. She's just bearing it out. And so I am really at the base, folk and pop. That's what I am. But that doesn't really exist. So Americana the term Americana showed up and it seemed to be kind of it works, I guess. But I mean, I really started to gravitate towards the term alt country. Sure. Because so many of my favorite current bands, you Google them and they pop up as alt country, the New Pornographers and Rilo Kiley and Jenny Lewis, and I've just talked about them a lot today already. I had another interview earlier, so it's just that pops up. So I don't know, I think I am a folk pop artist, but that's gonna make people be like, what are you talking about? Sure. So, I mean, I will gladly, I was saying earlier that it's kind of trying to define your sexuality. It's well, what are you? A lesbian, bisexual, pansexual? What? It's I'm not straight. So. right. Yeah. I remember talking to my friend Shane about queerness, and Shane is trans, and we were talking about, being straight is such a specific box, right? Mm-hmm. And then being trans is not, because there are so many different ways that can happen. And Shane was we were trying to come up with a better definition, than just straight and not, and then everything else. And I was it's you're in a, you're sort of out somewhere, right? You're out on the land, right? And there's either you can go from point A to point B, and that is straight. Mm-hmm. And then there's literally every other possibility, right? Yeah, exactly. And it's always weird to me that anyone would want to rigidly define. Yeah, yeah. Because it's only from here to there. But then there's, there's trees, and there's plants, and there's a river, and there's all this stuff. And as exactly as you just said, it seems as difficult to adhere, not religiously, but ardently to a genre. Yeah. And I also and I love that analogy. It's you have all these possibilities on Waze, GPS, you can go other ways. It's yeah. Yeah. And so for me, it's I don't get myself into a tizzy about it, but it's somebody asked me the other day, what are you like? And this was actually before I was compared to her, but I was it's Linda Ronstadt country. Mm. And I think the guy who asked me was oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. Cause it's that's the closest thing that I can think of. And I love her, and she's a huge idol of mine. And also she kind of permeated genres a lot. She taught herself how to sing opera at one point. So, right. But I would say it's full. It's I write really super folksy. Well, I write real things that happen to me, and I am interested in that. So that's why I write those lyrics that I do. And then, but I'm not going to write it unless I can do it to a melody that I think is very catchy to myself, which comes from my pop obsession. So, right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like my immediate social circles are increasingly they come from a background of bluegrass.
Yes.
And then I've never seen more people have identity crises than people who were steeped in bluegrass, because bluegrass probably of all genre in the past 100 years in the United States is the most literally conservative genre, like meaning that it's a genre that has tenets. If you step outside of the tenets,
you're taken away from it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And like things like, jazz, like, on the other side, great American creation.
Yeah.
It revels in
improvisation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It's always interesting to me to see where people land with genre, especially in genre that has any sort of crossover into country, which itself is another. I mean, it certainly is not. It's certainly not an adherent to its own form, because the form has changed over time. But it's certainly an adherent to its own aesthetic.
I forgot. It's like my favorite band of all time are the Dixie Chicks.
Oh yeah,
they're my favorite, and they kind of went the opposite direction. Obviously, they did a whole. They turned around, but I remember being like loving them as like a teenager with their like hits, and they transcended, like they were writing pop level country songs, like songs that were so catchy and so transcendent that it was, and if not writing, they were like recording them at least and picking the right songwriters. But when they came out with their Home album, which is like my favorite album ever, and it's the thing that's like it introduced me to Patty Griffin. It introduced me to like how to protest something like war through, because I had grown up hearing the Vietnam protest songs, but there was no war. And then all of a sudden Iraq happened. Right. And then Traveling Soldier came out. And I remember feeling that moment of being like, oh, that's how you do it. Because they're singing about, in Traveling Soldier, they're singing about Vietnam, but it's about Iraq. Right. And so like Home changed my life. And like it was everything. Actually, when I was making this album, I remember recording one song, and do you know Larissa Maestro? Okay, so she did all the string arrangements on this album, and she is, she's a genius. And Larissa, I love you, and just like I'm gonna gush about you till the end of time. But she, at one point, I was like trying to explain one song, and she says, "Girl, don't lie. This has Dixie Chicks written all over it." And I was like, "You're right. You're so right." And I always forget to include them in things, because to me it's so obvious that it's like they're my favorite band. But like they, for me, are my favorite genre bending group, because they kind of did it backwards. They went into this like folk album. I know people say when Home came out, it was a bluegrass album, but I was like, that's like to me quintessential folk music. Like Top of the World has like some of my favorite lyrics of all time, and it's like Patty Griffin just like slaying you in the heart. So that I'm still gonna ramble on about this, but it's my Dixie Chicks ramble right there.
And like, what is it like, I guess, bringing it back to Nashville, like what's it like coming to a place? I mean, the thing that I'm struck by is all these people and artists and phenomena that I grew up with that I didn't even think had any impact on my ideas or taste or whatever. I'm realizing they did, because when I see and feel them in the city, I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. What's it like coming here as someone who clearly has a reverent attitude towards music and the culture surrounding that?
It's been really, it's kind of humbling, because you realize how much work that goes into it, but also how much like people don't actually, the rest outside of the country, they don't realize how much comes out of Nashville. Like I'm listening to that Dolly Parton podcast right now that Radiolab is doing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like they're just talking about Dolly just putzing around Nashville, and I'm like, oh, okay. And you do realize it, and especially me working on Music Row right now, like we have our tendrils are just like out across the country. And people, the funny thing is like when I go out of town and I'm touring, like I'll say, oh, I'm from Nashville right now, you know? And people have this like reverence in their eyes of like, oh, Nashville. And I didn't get the same thing when I said, oh, I'm from New York.
Right.
I love New York, but it's like people have this reverence for Nashville. That's, I mean, it's kind of incredible, actually.
Well, I'm from New York means a million different things.
Yeah.
And like I'm from Nashville means like,
they have this reverence in their eyes. Yeah.
Right.
So like even last night, I was playing a show and my third grade choir teacher, like my first choir teacher, came from San Diego to see the show. And I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, you came all the way. And they're like, we've been wanting to come to Nashville for 10 years. This was like the moment to come. And I was like, oh, okay. Like it's a thing for people and it's justifiable. Like it's great. I think that I get a little bit, cynical is the wrong word, but like I get used to it. You just kind of get, you get accustomed, whatever the word is. It's
you acclimate.
Yeah,
right.
I'm having a brain fart.
Yeah, no. I feel like I constantly on some level have to check myself or acknowledge that goodness because if you don't, you let it pass by you.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm booking right now, so by the time this comes out, I'll probably have those tour dates announced. But I always forget how close we are to so much, and it's such like a logical reason for Nashville to be Music City because you're like 4 to 6 hours from every place that you need to go play, you know? So it's like, that's another thing. It's a moment where I'm just like, good job, Nashville.
My understanding, Nashville got its reputation as Music City because I believe because of Black recording artists in the 30s and 40s. But I think as an industry town, it was because its proximity to 80% of the population by way of shipping.
That's so interesting.
Is the reason. And if I'm wrong, Eric Voles told me that.
Okay.
And I want people to know that Eric is the reason. But he seems to know some things. So, yeah, I think it's because of that. Exactly like you say, it's the proximity to everything around.
Yeah, and it's still super, like, it's, like, useful. It happens, like, I'm in the midst of it as we speak. Well, not as we speak, but, yeah, today, lots of booking things. So
yeah. How is that process?
I learn more and more every day, even though I work at a booking agency, but it's like the industry is so giant and has so many different like cubby holes. And it's like me as a independent artist, it's like a different monster to book yourself than like the agency I work for, which is booking like established country artists. But like certain things you understand, like how to read in advance and like, what promoters and people and venues want to see in like the first paragraph, you know what I mean, of your email. So I'm learning more and more every day.
Yeah. Now you're a person who identifies sort of on the front end of like bio as queer. Mm-hmm. What does like in all of your hyphenates, country's also in there?
Yeah, it is in there. It's absolutely in there.
And so like, what is that? I mean, to me, it's shocking that, like 10 years ago, this would be a much different conversation. Yeah. To me, it's shocking that there is sort of the potential for that overlap in coexistence. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit about like what that means to you to be someone who is performing a bit in a country space and someone who not just identifies as queer, but is like that is part of your presentation? Yeah.
So I think I'm lucky in that I've never had any like aspirations is the wrong word. I've never had like. I've always known that it would not fly with the country establishment. I also did not grow up in the country, and like the term country being slapped on me is, I think, the fact that I use things like acoustic guitar fingerpicking and mandolins in my music, and people don't know how to place that. They're like, "Oh, what is that? We're gonna call it country." You know what I mean? And I talk in kind of like a 3 chords in the truth way. It's like I never adopted that moniker for myself. It just started getting placed on me because of the kinds of instruments I use, I think, and the way that I have kind of there is a kind of way that I write lyrics that is not pop, because pop can be very vague. And I think it's closest to like the folk and country world, where as much as you want to talk about pop country or bro country or whatever, they're very specific and conversational in their lyrics. So it's like I've just been, people tell me that I'm country, and I'm like, I grew up in the city, but I did grow up all around the country, and like I use these like folksy instruments. It's funny. So it's like I never like wanted to be like country, you know. It's literally been like slapped on me because of how I write music.
Sure.
And people don't know what to do. They don't know what folk music is. I don't think it, like you say folk and people are like, rah, rah, rah. So it's the nearest thing they go to is country. But also, I never had any like delusions that, you know, I'm going to be the next Taylor Swift or something. You know what I mean? So that gives me liberty to just be myself. So I'm just like, I'm queer, I'm Filipino. I write music that sounds like a thing that you think is country, so we're gonna go with that. And I have learned through doing this long enough, if people are just saying it to just like if it's not killing you and it's not completely inaccurate, just like let them go with it. You know, it'll help the press releases sell a little bit more. So somebody told me that recently. There's like, you have all these like great monikers that'll catch people's eyes. I was like, I'll use it. I don't care.
Yeah,
I'm just
it'll help you chart too.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I'm just like, it's fine. It's not true. That's for sure.
Right.
Like, so that's what. But I do say I try to be like alt country, because it's like you have people like Brandi Carlile and Jenny Lewis and, you know, Dixie Chicks Home. The New Pornographers are technically considered in there. Nico Case, you know, like, so that it's, but I'm not going to like yell at people if they're like, oh, you're country. I was like, that's whatever. What do you want me to be? I'll be whatever you want me to be.
I think that's the thing that happens to genre over time is that things get assigned to it because people don't know where to put it. And then the genre expands.
It's like a drawer, your junk drawer.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's like you use a banjo once and they're right. But like I fell in love with the banjo thanks to Sufjan Stevens. So it's like, you know, he's another one of my favorites.
What appealed to you about him when you were younger?
He's an incredible lyricist. And I am one of those weirdos that loves lyrics. I love good lyrics. And I think it comes from being from a family of writers. My parents were like writers. My dad is a business professor now, but I grew up like the biggest insult my parents could levy at you was, oh, they're a bad writer. Then I was like, ugh, yeah. So it's like I was always drawn to really like good short story writing, good lyrics. I love it. I just love it when somebody can get something across in like 2 sentences. And so I loved Sufjan and his lyrics at first. And then I realized that how he like uses every instrument on the planet basically. And I was at that point where I was just like, I was around a lot of instruments just by virtue of being 23 in New York City. Everybody has like a room full of instruments. So I would write things on different instruments, even though I'm mainly just a singer and a guitar player. But like I would tinker around on a banjo or tinker around on a mandolin and tinker around with an electric guitar or like a keyboard or whatever. And so I really appreciated it when people did things that were different sounding. And also, shout out to my dad. I grew up in my first music lessons were like classical music oriented. So you always learn like the elements of an orchestra. And so I was always very bored by typical rock and roll instruments. Like, no offense to everybody, but it's like boring to me. Like I would rather hear like an oboe solo. I really would. Like I remember my dad, like when I was 5, letting me listen to Peter and the Wolf. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. It was like every instrument is different and each element of an orchestra like lends something to this and that, and like this is the dynamics that it lends. So I don't know, I just think I would get bored by writing with just the typical rock thing, quote unquote.
That's what stood out. I remember like I grew up with punk and metal, and then when I heard Seven Swans, right? When I heard that, like there was a lot of sound on there I didn't know where it came from.
Yeah.
And I felt that same way and I feel like this is sort of a natural transition for like punk and metal kids, but I felt that way about Bright Eyes too. That I was like,
yes.
I was like, where like, how are they making this sound?
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and those are probably the first records that I listened to with
and
like
Connor
great
is
musicianship.
such a good lyricist. Also Connor Oberst is an incredible lyricist and just a great, like, Poison Oak still to this day, like, will make me bawl. Just like, I don't care. Just like, don't play that song when I'm driving, because it's like
If you want to survive the drive.
yeah, I know. Yeah. Aeneas Mitchell also, I know I'm going down like this deep folk thing, but Aeneas Mitchell is also like one of my favorite like songwriters. And she, for years, I don't think got enough recognition, but she just like has a Tony Award winning musical now, which was a total crazy flex. But I was like, girl, I have loved you since the beginning. And so like, that's the world that I come from. But I think it had a moment, like a blip moment. And then it like in like the late 2000s where it was like kind of really cool. And then it kind of, I don't know what happened musically. I was coming out of the closet, so I kind of lost track of the music world. But yeah, that, like, I could talk about that stuff all day. Regina Spektor is a huge one for me. Huge.
I saw her at the greatest, smallest rooms, and she was just the best.
I can't, like, to me, Samson is like, I sometimes when I'm writing lyrics, I'm like, can I write something that gets enough across as Samson does in like the smallest amount of time? So apologies to everybody who's like, who's Regina Spektor?
Oh, well, no, fuck you if you don't know, and stop everything and go and find out who Regina Spektor.
I know, huge for me, so huge.
Oh,
like,
that shit! Yeah, I saw her with like Amanda Palmer and Of Montreal in the same collection of places and spots, and I was just like, oh, like this is
it's the golden era.
All this is possible. Great.
Yeah. Oh, I can't even. If you want to have a good time, there's a video of her doing a bunch of like a collection of songs with like some symphony. I think it's a national symphony or something. But like I like stayed up till 4 a.m. watching them just bawling in my bedroom recently. So, but yeah, they were huge for me, and I think it's just because they like create soundscapes with all these instruments and their lyrics and really good melodies. Like, that's the thing. So it's very, I love them. Yeah.
Yeah. What's you know, with this record out, like, what does that mean for you? Like, you get a record out, right? And you've it seems like it's out and now people know about it.
Yeah.
And obviously you have to do all the things around it.
Yeah.
But like, what is it like to have it out of you?
I'm really proud of it. This is the first time in my life that I've made music and I've recorded it, and it's exactly how it sounded in my brain, which has never happened before, not because of the talent of other people working on it, but because I didn't know. I think Ira Glass talks about, he talks about how you have, when you're starting out, you're beginning, you have this idea, you have this like level of taste, and you're trying to get it done, and you just keep doing it, and you keep failing, and it doesn't match your expectations, and it's very frustrating, but you just have to keep doing it. I'm paraphrasing his speech really badly, but I took that to heart. And I just like kept going at it, and I messed up so many times, and it's so expensive to mess up recordings, and it wasn't the other people's fault. It was like I just had to make that mistake. I just had to keep making it, and this is the first time that it's like. And my two co-producers on this are my bandmate Abby Hairston, who has been my bandmate forever, and my friend Trace Faulkner, and like together, like we got this out of me over like 3 years. And I listened to it, and every song is exactly how I sounded in my brain, which is wild. Like, so I'm just very proud. Like, if I die, and this is the last time I do music right now, it's like my grandkids or grandnieces and nephews or whatever can look back on this. Like, that's, for me, it's like I've left my art. So there. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I'm happy about that. Like, it was how I got through my mom dying and like a huge breakup and my grandma dying and my cat dying. And it's like, it was all happened in like a year, and it became my journal kind of. So like, I'm just really proud of it. Like, and then we got my friend Tyler Varvel to like help design the album cover, and it's beautiful, and it's just like I love it. Like I'm gonna be a very proud old bohemian lady in a loft somewhere in Manhattan, being like, "This is my album from 2019." Yeah.
Well, it looks. I mean, it looks great, and that's the interesting thing too about this place is that like I think for a long time, records that you would call folk or folk pop, whatever.
Yeah, we can just call it alt country or country, whatever you want to call it.
For whatever's happening.
Yeah.
The aesthetic reality didn't necessarily match the what you're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And like I feel like you've done a really great job of sort of matching those two things. Like you have this like look that aligns with what you have put out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Like we kind of were going for that, and I was just shout out to Tyler. He's a genius, like a visual genius. He's a hairstylist, but he also just gets the optics. I've been watching a lot of Succession. Can you tell? It's
Sure.
like the optics. and he was like, just trust me. And I was like, okay, I do. I actually trust you. You're the only stylist who hasn't messed up my hair ever. So I trust you. And Kate Brady photographed it, and she works with a lot of musicians, and
she's a phenomenal photographer.
She's incredible. Yeah. So we had the most fun photo shoot also, and it was me, and it kind of represents everything. It's like I've grown up on both coasts. Like I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. It's like I remember being a kid in San Diego, and my grandfather, who was my babysitter growing up, was from Georgia. He was a Southerner, and when he had undiagnosed, he was untreated bipolar disorder. So when he would have manic episodes, like he would just start like talking about like the Civil War and like Yankees and stuff like that, like classic Southern stuff. So I'm just like this little Filipino, like half white, half Filipino kid, well, quarter Filipino, but whatever. And listening to my manic grandfather talking about shooting Yankees, which he hadn't done, but he would like go into like this like delusion. And my dad is a Yankee from Boston, like a preppy from Boston. And I'm in San Diego in like a Filipino neighborhood. And I just remember being like, okay, this is interesting. This is a very interesting, this is an interesting identity to have. Like I'm living out two wars, the Civil War and World War II, like, cause my grandmother survived World War II in the Philippines. And like, we grew up listening to those stories. So like for me being like an American is all these identities. And it's like, so I was thinking about that yesterday, looking at my album cover, because we just got like some of our like vinyl test pressings in. I'm like, I think that the album cover kind of catches. It definitely sums up my weird crossroads of identities. So, which I'm very proud of all of them, but it's also just like which code I have to code switch constantly. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think you on your Instagram profile, you quote Hunter Thompson.
Yeah. One of my favorites.
What is the quote?
When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro.
Right. Exactly.
He's my favorite. My cat is named after him.
Really?
Yeah. Gonzo.
Oh
yeah.
my God. That's fantastic. And I mean, I think that's in like, if nothing else, like that's sort of where identity is now, is that it's like well, all things are kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like how do we own the weird? Yeah,
and you have to, or else you're gonna end up giving yourself a nervous breakdown. And I can tell you that for fact, because that's what happened to me. Like I tried to like cherry pick my identities at one point years ago, like when I was still like coming out of the closet and stuff. It makes you, it will exacerbate any mental health issues you have, and it will send you in a spiral. And it's like, honestly, you just have to own all of it. Be like, all right, I guess this is who I am. Whoever you are, whoever you are, like, just like own it. Like trying to cherry pick it is probably really bad for your brain.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I had one of those really good nervous breakdowns when I was like 17. Oh God. And I remember going to therapy. It was the first time I went to therapy. I found a therapist talk. And I was like, it was like I used to put everything in like a filing cabinet in my head, and then it exploded. And she's like, oh, honey,
yeah,
you had a nervous breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah. It happens.
It's not manageable.
No, it won't work. It doesn't work. And it's like, honestly, learning to grieve, which has helped me, as morbid as this sounds, like helped me deal with so much other stuff in my life. It's because you can't, like, death is the biggest one, and you can't like, you just have to grieve. Like, otherwise you're gonna, go through like multiple nervous breakdowns.
Right.
And so for me, it was just like, okay, I have to do this. I can't escape it. It's like the angel of death is always there. So you just have to do it. And, it has made me so accepting of myself. And I used to not be at all. I used to like hide so much. And I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't care anymore. It's like, what you going to do? Right. So, I always just want people to get more free if they can. Just like get more free. And I know how hard it is because like I was the most unfree person at one point. And so hopefully by the time I'm that 99-year-old bohemian lady in a loft in Manhattan, I'm very free. I'll probably be a nudist by then.
Well, I'm stoked for you.
Thank you so much.
This is awesome. Thank you so much for catching up with me.
Oh, absolutely. This has been fun.
All right, everybody, that's it. Nashville Demystified, again, is brought to you by Knack Factory, and we own this town. It is made, like literally made, by Jesse LaFontaine, who takes all of the things that I record and then send his way, and he makes them into an episode, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you, Jesse LaFontaine, for all things sound and post-production. Listen next week. It's going to be a good one. It's always going to be a good one, but, next week especially. Thank you all for listening. Take care.
Just trying to get it together, it seems. Takes all of the energy I need to succeed. Spent 6 whole months waking up in strange beds, trying to outrun the call, finding out that she's dead. Won't you come pick me up? Forget the years that I spent drunk. Take me home. Won't you come pick me up? Forget the years that I spent drunk. Take me home.